here at the Newcastle United training ground where myself and Jordan have just been speaking to Eddie Howe ahead of Newcastle United's trip to Manchester City in the FA Cup. Been a frustrating week for Newcastle United, injuries, defeat at Chelsea, but we'll go into the press conference on a positive note with Anthony Gordon called up to the England squad. Thoroughly deserved, I'm sure you agree, Jordan, and Eddie Howe certainly agreed as well.
Yeah, I mean, I said last week on the video, it'd be an absolute travesty if Anthony Gordon wasn't involved. I think the only thing threatening that was actually his injury on Monday night. Thankfully, he has avoided a serious injury. Should be back tomorrow, training today. So yeah, he should be back for that trip that he had. But yeah, in terms of that England call-up, totally deserved. A player that is in a season where I think Newcastle have been inconsistent in terms of results. Anthony Gordon has been a consistent performer, and as I said before, he's one of the most informed wingers in the Premier League. So I'm glad to see that Gareth Southgate has finally proven that he has some football brain and called up Anthony Gordon, because we've seen in the past that he's ignored players in form. Anthony Gordon is banging form, and yeah, hopefully he does get that first cap, because although he's called up, might not necessarily get a game, but he should, because Brazil, Belgium, it's a real opportunity for Anthony Gordon, an opportunity for Gareth Southgate as well to really have a look at him. So hopefully he goes there, impresses, and yeah, beyond that as well, I suppose the target now for Anthony Gordon is to remain fit, consistent between now and the end of the season, and probably has one eye on the Euro squads as well.
Yeah, and that's something he's done all season, remain fit despite a few injury scares. I remember the last time at Chelsea, he was on the receiving end of a bad tackle, played through it to an extent, eventually got taken off, but availability, as he said, is the best ability, and that's something that you can't take away from Anthony Gordon this season. And it's something I put to Eddie Howe, whether he wished he had more players like Anthony Gordon, and Eddie Howe just spoke about how players go through periods like this where they make themselves available. Joe Linton was like that last year, but it's been two stop-start for him this season. But yeah, Anthony Gordon has been the shining light of a inconsistent season for Newcastle United, and I think despite all the injury troubles, he's a player who's constantly made himself available and made an impact even when he's had knocks. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because he's still a young lad, he's still sort of learning the game to a degree as well, but he's shown real maturity and real quality as well when in the side, and to make himself available, being a role model to the younger players as well. So really pleased for him. Hopefully he's involved tomorrow. Sounds like he'll be subject to a late fitness test, but trained partly yesterday, light training session with the rest of the squad, got involved with that, and will train this morning, and then a decision will be made. But I'd imagine he'll be involved, if not in the starting lineup, then certainly on the bench. But yeah, that was some scare he gave us on Monday night.
Yeah, I mean the physio incident was spoke about on Monday after the game, when his knees bent. He's bent his leg with physio, and then yeah, Anthony Gordon has reached in pain, which wasn't a good sign. But yeah, usually with those knee problems, you do fear the worst. But yeah, thankfully he's avoided a serious injury, as we understand, and yeah, big couple of weeks coming up for him. Will he play tomorrow? I think he will. Anthony Gordon, as you mentioned there, several times this season has made himself available. And look, I think he's played in every game, hasn't he, this season?
Or the West Ham game where he was suspended.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So
taken out of his hands.
I think Anthony Gordon will be desperate to play tomorrow, and yeah, hopefully Newcastle can spring an upset on Manchester City before that England games. But anyway, moving on, before we get into the FA Cup game, what else we got, Dom?
Well, I guess if we want to stick on injuries, Harvey Barnes is one where it's another game out for him. He will miss the Manchester City trip, which we probably expected based on what Eddie Howe said after the Chelsea game, but he's reinforced those comments, said hopefully he'll be back now for West Ham, which for Harvey Barnes, it's just been it's bordering on a write-off season for him, even though he scored twice in, what is it, 4 starts, something like that for Newcastle. It's been a real tough season since his arrival. He's made an impact to a degree when he's got on the pitch, but he's not gone on the pitch enough, and after returning from a long injury absence to then suffer even a minor hamstring tweak, as it's been described or put to us as, now it's looking like by the time he plays West Ham, it'll be another 4 weeks out. So even though Newcastle have a gap, they'll go to Dubai in that time as well, back to Dubai. During the international break, the players who aren't called up to the national teams anyway. It's going to be 4 weeks out for Harvey Barnes, which again, then you having to get back up to speed and things like that. So yeah, it's been a very difficult season for Harvey Barnes.
Yeah, no, I asked Eddie Howe about Harvey Barnes, about his latest injury, the season so far, how he judges for Harvey Barnes, and it was hugely frustrating for him. But then, sort of praised him, said that he's a goal scorer. We've seen the moments of quality. He mentioned that Luton Town game. You can probably go back to that Aston Villa game as well. I think probably them two moments are the only moments that we've seen Harvey Barnes at his best, maybe in terms of them goals against those two teams. But apart from that, it's been a real struggle for him this season. But Eddie Howe has backed him to get fit, because he's back on the grass, as Eddie Howe used the term in the press conference there. So again, you would suspect he's back for West Ham, and then I think it'll be 9 league games between West Ham and the end of the season, where Eddie Howe has backed the player to try and make an impact. But you're right, it's 9 games to try and in many ways justify your price tag. It's a difficult ask. So I think next season will hopefully be the season when Newcastle as a whole see the real Harvey Barnes. But I think at this moment, he's missed so many games, stop-start. It's been a real challenge, probably a real frustrating one for him on a personal level as well, because you look at the Anthony Gordon situation, came in obviously difficult first 6 months, but this season has been so consistent, got an England call up. I wonder if Harvey Barnes come to Newcastle from Leicester City had England ambitions as well, or certainly international ambitions, maybe even with Scotland as well. Obviously there's a chance he could switch his allegiances to there. So it's in terms of the Euros in the summer, is it too late for Harvey Barnes to make an impact in terms for Newcastle and either nation? I think it probably is. So probably needs a little bit of a reset in the summer for him, and hopefully we'll see the real Harvey Barnes, as I say, next season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, but Harvey Barnes' injury, do you think it's almost been a blessing in disguise in some ways, given it's unlocked Anthony Gordon and given him that freedom to play consistently and reach his best levels? It
is interesting because in the summer we were all calling out for a new right winger, Almiron upgrade, if you want to say. And I do wonder if part of Eddie Howe's thinking in terms of bringing Harvey Barnes was to switch Anthony Gordon over the right hand side, and would Anthony Gordon have had the same impact as he has this season from the other side? Possibly not. So yeah, you're playing devil's advocate there, but you probably actually made a good point.
Food for thought. Let us know in the comments whether you think that's happened, that's been the case. But yeah, we'll stick with injuries. Last one, Nick Pope, Jordan. I mean, we've been given mixed news on Nick Pope. Would it be March? Eddie Howe said to you the other week that looking like April. Now he's saying it's looking like late April. So by the time he comes back, Nick Pope to full fitness may only get the chance to play a few games, which is a blow, considering you're looking at the stats, and you don't want to sort of hang Martin Dubravka out to dry, but Newcastle had one of the best defences in the Premier League when Nick Pope was in goal. Now have one of the worst with Martin Dubravka in goal. So in terms of those spells of games. So yeah, Nick Pope, big miss, and him out for another sort of month and a half is tough.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the defensive stats there. I don't think it is just Martin Dubravka, but it does coincide with that, and it does highlight how much Newcastle do miss Nick Pope. And I think once Nick Pope returns end of April, how many games Newcastle got left? 5 at best, at most. So yeah, it's pretty much his season over. It was hope. There was sort of reports going around that he could even be back this month. That was pushed back to April by Eddie Howe last week, and then to late April. Is it a setback? Possibly not, because Eddie Howe never said what timing when he would be back in April. But I think a lot of people expected Nick Pope to be back a little bit sooner. So yeah, it's Martin Dubravka for pretty much the rest of the season. You think it's on Martin Dubravka to keep the jersey really now, because Nick Pope comes back for 4 or 5 games at the end of the season. It would probably be a bit of an insult to Martin Dubravka if he was to. Yeah, it would be an insult to Martin Dubravka if Nick Pope was to walk straight back in. So it's probably Martin Dubravka's jersey to lose now. But you look at them stats there, and they speak for themselves. They really do miss him. And it's a huge blow that It does sound like as I say, he's going to be out for until the remaining games of the season.
Yeah, it's a tough position Eddie Howe's going to be put in, because if Newcastle still have a fighting chance of Europe with a few games to go, then their form will have had to have improved. So then do you keep Martin Dubravka in the team?
Yeah.
Or then if it doesn't improve, then you potentially put Nick Pope in, but maybe you've got too much work left to do with just a few games left. So yeah, it's a really, really tough one. And where do you want to go next? You got...
I thought, well, that's injuries covered, isn't it?
Yes.
Should we go into fan criticism?
Yeah, because
Geordie journalist criticism.
Well, yeah, journalists in general.
Yeah.
Put it on Eddie Howe, ask him the tough questions, which is fair. It's fair. Newcastle haven't been good enough, and I thought he was asked a few tough questions, although from a fan perspective mainly. He was quoted a fan tweet saying Newcastle was spineless at Stamford Bridge on Monday night. And Eddie Howe basically said he didn't like to hear it.
Yeah, he didn't necessarily bite back at the fan accusations.
He said it was justified, actually.
Yeah,
he said
did.
Those fans, their opinions aren't going to change. It's up to us to change their opinions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he was. He refused to bite, which is no surprise. I don't think Eddie Howe wants to get into war words with supporters, maybe with journalists, if we're throwing our opinions around. But the last thing he wants to do was annoy the supporters, shall we say? So, yeah, it was a very. The tweet that was put to Eddie Howe was a very strongly worded tweet. The term cowards was using it as well. But to be fair to Eddie Howe, he answered it. Didn't really show on his
He answered it the only way he could.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So he didn't bite. Answered it well, I thought. But yeah, talk about tough questions. There was a couple of tough questions for Eddie Howe in that press conference today. I thought. I mentioned there the spineless cowards. Tweet was strong. Let's be honest, and he answered it, and Eddie Howe in many ways I don't think got an easy ride today. I think in terms of the press conference it was 35 minutes, but there was some tough questions there, and you've got from our point of view you've got to try and find the balance. You can't go in full pelt with all these accusations and tough questions, if you like, on the back of what has been a poor hours form. I'm not saying it hasn't been. I think you look at the form since December. It's been atrocious. Well, it has been atrocious. It's been bad. 14 points from 14 games. It's not good enough. But again, we're talking about sort of credit in the bank. Is there enough yet to blow off the edge with Eddie Howe? I don't think there is. Do I think it might be getting to that stage? Possibly. But at this moment in time, I think Eddie Howe is very much still in a strong position, and only he can determine his fate between now and the end of the season. Only he can turn this around. There's concerns, which again we voiced our own concerns, but Eddie Howe is the only man that can change the season around and change Newcastle United's fortunes. If Newcastle go and have a strong end of the season, then going into summer there'll be a lot more positivity. If this run continues, then there'll be a lot of concerns heading into the summer and next season. But as we stand now, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, I think Eddie Howe will get tougher press conferences than he did today.
Yeah.
He got asked a couple of slightly awkward questions, let's say, but I think a fan who may be out like wanting to turn the screw on Eddie Howe, if you like, would maybe watch that press conference and be slightly disappointed or underwhelmed. There was only a few. There's one he was quoted what Jamie Carragher said about Newcastle playing like it's the end of the season, like they've got nothing to play for, and Eddie Howe obviously bit back at that. He completely refuted that. He said that's definitely not what we are about internally, and there's still a lot to play for, still fighting for Europe, still obviously in the FA Cup, though in the next 48 hours that may change. It could be a lot more positive, but could be a lot more negative if previous games are to suggest anything. It will be a lot more negative, but I thought Eddie Howe was given a more tough press conference.
It was a tougher ride, yeah. It was
a slightly tougher ride, but I think the tough ride will come if Newcastle get knocked out the FA Cup and then struggle against West Ham United. I think that's probably the time where Eddie Howe will start to face more serious questions. And I asked Eddie Howe a question and he didn't like it.
No, he didn't.
Like it at all. I wouldn't say it was the toughest question he faced in the press conference, but it was an answer that I thought was quite obvious, and Eddie Howe sort of made that clear, because Sean Longstaff, who we've been critical of in recent games, and a lot of fans have been critical of, player who's done so well for Newcastle previously under Eddie Howe, but the past couple of months he has played every game for Newcastle, has never been substituted in the starting lineup every week. And I just put it to Eddie Howe, I said, why is that happening? Why is that the best course of action for Newcastle United and for Sean Longstaff? Because Eddie Howe earlier in the press conference said Sean Longstaff hasn't trained properly and is playing through a slight injury. Foot injury, did he say? Yes. So I said, why is that the best? And Eddie Howe basically, if you look, asked a quite cosy question before that about Anthony Gordon, where he was quite positive, and then his entire demeanour changed. He went, we haven't had the players available to select. That's why Sean Longstaff is playing 90 minutes week in, week out, which is fair enough. But then he also admitted Sean Longstaff does need a rest. And my sort of disagreement with Eddie Howe, it wasn't a disagreement as such, but him keeping Sean Longstaff on for 90 minutes week after week after week, yet he'll bring Bruno off, for example, although Bruno is
probably the yellow card situation.
Nursing a suspension. But they've had Joe Willock back, Lewis Miley, who he's obviously had to manage as well. So I thought Eddie Howe's answer did make some sense, but yeah, Sean Longstaff is a player who probably needs a rest, and Eddie Howe did admit that. But yeah, he was spiky. I
think it struck a chord at first.
Because I questioned his decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think it struck a nerve at first, where I thought he'd give the first line the answer, and I thought he was going to stop it there. Yeah. But then he kept going, and I think the more he answered the question, the more he became more sort of open to it. Yeah. I think, but I've actually done it before. Eddie Howe, it was last year. It was the first time he really bit at someone. I actually asked about Martin Dubravka before he went to Manchester United, because Nick Pope came in, was the number one immediately. Martin Dubravka dropped. I asked if, Martin Dubravka, if there was an opportunity for him to be a number one elsewhere, would you let him go? And he bit quite heavily. He said, well, we've got a game to prepare for tomorrow. That's not in my thinking, but it was really abrupt at the time, and I remember being taken back by it. So I'm glad that you've joined the club. I think probably 18 months later.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought that was pretty much it from Eddie Howe's press conference. It's hard because there was the obvious positivity and positive PR from Anthony Gordon's England call, which is what the press conference sort of was about, and then moved on to Manchester City. Look, FA Cup quarter final, they don't come around very often. They sort of they won't come much tougher than Manchester City, but Eddie Howe did point to the fact that every time Newcastle played Man City, they haven't picked up a lot of wins, but they've always been close games. They probably should have drawn at St James's Park back in January. They did beat Man City, a slightly depleted Man City, but Newcastle made changes themselves as well in the Carabao Cup back in September, and then even the game at the Etihad where Newcastle were way off the best, actually we only beat 1-0 and we're still in the game sort of throughout. So drew 3-3 last season, and then was it 2-0 at the Etihad. So the competitive, relatively speaking, against Manchester City. So I would say there's nothing to fear, but I think there probably is.
So much to fear.
There's no Kevin De Bruyne, which is nice.
Yeah, but they've still got many other world-class players. I mean, it does feel like the impossible task. Manchester City are serial winners. They won a quadruple last year, if you include that Club World Cup. They get these stages, the quarter-finals, and they know how to see it through. I think for Newcastle to go there, even if Newcastle are banging form, it's a really, really tough ask. I think for Newcastle to get through, you've got to hope that Newcastle play the best they have this season, and you've got to hope Manchester City probably play the worst.
Well, since they played Newcastle at St James's last time anyway in the Cup.
I just I want to be all positive and say, Newcastle got nothing to fear, they've got a chance, but it doesn't feel like that. But to try and add some positivity, there's been a lot of disappointment and anger around the season and how it's unfolded since that. Since that December, and when they last beat Manchester United, they've had a really bad run of form since then. But if they can go and get a result at Old Trafford, if they can get a result at the Etihad Stadium, it almost flips the dynamic of the season again, where you're back at Wembley. Because if you look at the end of the season, Newcastle at Wembley, they end up finishing in the European place, which again I think is really important that they do go and finish in the top 7. Looks difficult at the moment, but if you get to an FA Cup semi-final opportunity to go to a final, you look back on the season, in terms of just looking at it, it doesn't look that. It looks like a good season, but what I say around that is the context hasn't felt good. But I say if you've got an FA Cup semi-final to look forward to during these final few games, I think it'll just add some positivity. I think the bad form previously in the league, the FA Cup had been like a beacon of light, if you like.
Can't say that.
I can't say that, you're right.
Beacon of hope.
That's what we said. Beacon of hope. I've done what you've done. Beacon of hope. It has it, and it's even when Newcastle beat Blackburn Rovers, it's like, oh yes, we're 1 game away from Wembley, but then all that positivity was sort of zapped by Manchester City away. If Newcastle were playing a Coventry City, for example, tomorrow, all the excitement will be towards the FA Cup. So I'm waffling here as I always do, but if Newcastle can somehow find a result tomorrow, it does flip the season. But if they don't, which let's be honest is unlikely, the pressures on to really go and finish the league season strong and finish in the European places, because if Newcastle don't have Europe next year, having finished 4th in the Premier League last season, I know you've had all the injuries, I think it'll be a real disappointment if Newcastle don't have European football to look forward to next season.
Yes, and it feels like an impossible task, but if Newcastle were to win tomorrow, as inconsistent and up and down and generally quite negative as this season's been, you're then 2 wins away from the best season Newcastle have had in the modern era. So there's hope in that regard. It may be small, but there's hope. And we'll cling to that at least until tomorrow tea time anyway.
Geordie Journal's trying to spread some pre-Man City positivity, but deep
we'll
down,
see.
we'll see. Hopefully, but
you never know.
Yeah, probably not.
But we'll be there.
We will.
And we'll be doing our pre-match thoughts, maybe post-match reaction. Definitely, we'll be joined by Liam Kennedy as always, who'll be keen on the live, and then probably say the same things afterwards, with the help of me and Jordan. But we'll be there, and obviously if you like what we do, please remember to comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that for all your latest Geordie Journals content. See you later.